All right, so welcome to the 4th Annual West Virginia Game Developers Expo. You get a little excitement? All right. Try to wake up a little bit in the morning. I want to thank everyone for coming out. You guys make this event possible. And I wanted to introduce BAFTA award-winning AAA game designer. He's worked at Ubisoft, Microsoft, Bungie. Now he works at Epic Games as an evangelist for the Unreal Engine. You guys ever play Fortnite? Sea of Thieves, any game, most every game in 2018. All right, so Christian Allen, without further ado, round of applause, please.
Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good? It's cold. What's the deal? I left Seattle, it was like 50. I got here, I was like, it's 26 degrees this morning, and I'm wearing sandals. Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay in the back? We good to go? Okay. I can speak louder if we need to. I want to say thanks first off to the sponsors of the show for having me here today. It's very cool to have the opportunity to speak to you, especially first thing. I know some of you folks are, it's Friday morning, it's tired, whatever, you can take a nap, I don't mind. My name is Christian Allen. I am the Unreal Evangelist for North America. This is my contact information up here. And if you want to take pictures, feel free. If you want to record, this is being recorded. It's going to be broadcast later, but feel free to do whatever you want to do. And if you tweet some pictures to me at Cerelan is my Twitter handle. The best picture or the best comment, I'll send you some swag or give you some swag here at the show. You can also reach me on LinkedIn, Christian Allen Designer. On LinkedIn I am, and on Twitter, I'm Christian Allen the game designer, not Christian Allen the MMA fighter. So if you see the picture with the shirt off, that's not me. I generally don't do those photos. Facebook, Instagram, MySpace, I don't do any of those. Well, I do Facebook, but you don't need to see pictures of my kids, so I'm just going to ignore you on that. But let me jump right into this. I'll talk a little bit about my background. I'm going to talk a bit about the Unreal Engine. This talk is titled An Indie's Guide to the Unreal Ecosystem, but the stuff that I'm going to touch on today really applies to whether you're interested in being an indie or just interested in working in the AAA game space. And a lot of it can apply as well to other engines, but I do work for Epic and they're paying me to be here, so I'm going to talk primarily about the Unreal Engine. So my role as an evangelist, before I kind of get into my background, is one, I do this. This is my public-facing role. I travel around the country. U.S. and Canada is my focus in North America. I have counterparts around the world. We're up to, I want to say 15 evangelists, 12 or 15 evangelists. It used to be 5, but we've been expanding. We've got 6 in Europe now, broken up by country. We've got 2 in South America, 1 focusing on Brazil and 1 focusing on the rest of Latin America. We've got 1 in Australia, New Zealand. And then for some of the other regions like China, Japan, and Korea, we have dedicated business groups. So our roles as evangelists are to do things like this. But on the biz dev side, my focus is on indie game devs. So I focus on what we call our EULA licensees, and I'll talk a little bit about our license later. And really, my goal is to identify what I call teams that have shippable heads on their shoulders. Games that are going to ship is the primary focus. And either generate revenue or just showcase the engine in some good way. So I spend a lot of time talking to devs, with my background, which I'll get into, applying a lot of my background and experience, both my big successes and my even bigger failures, in helping them apply that knowledge to hopefully help them be successful in the space. Because if they're successful, we're successful. So a little bit about my background. I am actually a game designer. I'm not a salesperson. I've been working in games or working on games for right at 20 years this year. I started in the late 90s as a modder, making mods for Rainbow Six Rogue Spear. which probably came out before a lot of you were born. Anybody here born before 2000, or I'm sorry, anybody, I guess, who was born after 2000 in here? Okay, great, awesome. Yes, so I started modding and working on games before you were born, for the folks that just raised their hands. Oh my gosh, I feel old. I started my professional career at Red Storm Entertainment, which was owned by Ubisoft in the early 2000s, and I got hired to specifically work on Rainbow Six on the PC. So I started doing weapons design on Rainbow Six 3 Athena Sword, and then because the games industry is the games industry, the job that I got hired for, Rainbow Six on the PC, almost immediately changed to Ghost Recon on the console. Which was interesting because I hadn't played a console game since the SNES. And I thought consoles were for kids and not for serious gamers. Suddenly I was a game designer on one. So I started on the Ghost Recon franchise, first on Ghost Recon Island Thunder on the Xbox, and primarily focused on Xbox and Xbox 360 throughout my time at Ubisoft. I worked my way up very quickly to lead designer on Ghost Recon 2. And Ghost Recon 2 Summit Strike, and then creative director and lead multiplayer designer on Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter, better known as GRAW. Before I left, I did work on what would eventually become Ghost Recon Future Soldier. Interesting fun fact about that is if you start up Future Soldier and you start playing, the opening cinematic is this story about these three ghosts that go off on their own and they all get killed. And those ghosts' names are McGann, Haynes, and Allen. And that is myself, Jeff McGann, and Mike Haynes, and we were all three leads that left during the project. So they killed us. So that's what you can expect in the games industry. If you leave during a project, they'll make a cinematic about you dying. Then I moved on to Bungie, where I was a design lead on Halo Reach, which is, of course, the best Halo. Anybody who plays it knows. And in the lower left, I do have Ghost Recon Predator, and another funny story about that one is I had never worked on a PSP title, but I was reading through some articles, and I was reading this review of Ghost Recon Predator, which was a PSP game. Has anybody played the PSP? It was kind of like a phone that only played PlayStation games. It was called a handheld back in the day, or like a Switch that didn't plug into your TV set. But I was reading a review for it, and it had this whole story about the ghosts going to Sri Lanka and trying to stop a war and all this stuff. And I'm reading it, and I was like, wait a minute, I wrote that story. Like, I specifically remember writing that. And it was actually the original story that I'd written for Ghost Recon Future Soldier before Future Soldier got melded with another team's project. And obviously, it sat in the Ubisoft archives somewhere. And when they contracted, I believe they contracted Virtuos to do the PSP game, someone dug that out and used it as a story. So I put it on my credits list. I don't know if I'm actually credited in the game, but I did write the story for it. From there, I moved on to Warner Brothers, WB Games, based in Seattle, where I started. I got, again, fun games industry stuff. I got hired to work on Mad Max. We were going to develop Mad Max internally, so I went down to Australia and had some meetings with George Miller and Corey Barlog, and started working on that. And then very quickly we decided we're in the midst. Warner Brothers at the time had just acquired Midway Games, which included a bunch of studios. NetherRealm's probably the biggest one, the Mortal Kombat studio that you guys know about. But once we made that acquisition and all those things were going through, we decided that we were not going to do Mad Max as internal studio development. So I joined the due diligence team on that, where I flew around the world basically interviewing game development teams and reviewing pitches on who wanted to work on that, and eventually ended up on Avalanche out of Northern Europe. And the great thing about Avalanche's pitch for Mad Max is nobody had seen the script. We had seen the script, even though there actually wasn't a script for the movie. There was a giant storyboard in a room about half this size where George Miller just storyboarded the entire movie. Which you can kind of get when you see the movie, that it was a real storyboard heavy movie. But nobody had seen that, and so everybody had these kind of different pitches and takes on Mad Max and what they thought it was going to be, having known nothing about the movie. But what Avalanche did is, has anybody played Just Cause, any of the Just Cause games? Yeah, so what they did is they took Just Cause 2, I believe, they were working on at the time, and they just reskinned it to look like Mad Max and dropped in the Mad Max truck or the Mad Max Interceptor and made a desert environment and had Mad Max driving around and blowing everything up. And that's what got them the pitch, because everybody else just submitted PowerPoints. They submitted a build of the game already working. So after that, I moved on. I did some work with the acquired Midway IPs. Did some pitches for various different movies and DC games. Worked with Jim Lee with DC on that. And then a new movie franchise, well, not a new movie franchise, the Hobbit movie was coming up. And so I started working on what would eventually become Shadows of Mordor, which started as a pitch for the Hobbit, the movie, the game. And that was really interesting because the first couple months was me trying to convince everybody that we shouldn't make a game about playing a Hobbit. And it was really challenging for the Warner Brothers executives to get through the fact that I was pitching a game for the movie called The Hobbit, which was not about hobbits. And, you know, even people that were familiar with the Lord of the Rings movies, which obviously the Warner Brothers executives were, still had a lot of trouble kind of getting that across. And how are we going to communicate this to players? Won't everybody want to play The Hobbit? And I'm like, no, nobody will want to play The Hobbit. So we came up with this pitch, and the original pitch that I worked on was a cooperative game with an elf and a dwarf, and that eventually got morphed together, and the project, after I left, eventually became Shadows of Mordor, and Monolith was the team that ended up shipping that, and it turned out quite well, so good on them. After Warner Brothers, I left in 2012 and decided to go the indie route, for good or bad. So I started my own studio, ran a Kickstarter, raised a couple $100,000, and eventually got a publisher and shipped our first game called Takedown Red Saber, which was on PC and Xbox 360. And then moved on. At the time, because my funding was originally from Kickstarter, I didn't have any money to pay myself. So I also started doing consulting on the side. And so I was doing transmedia consulting for Hollywood and worked on a bunch of stuff. But the big thing that I was going to be my big break into Hollywood was working on the After Earth franchise. After Earth was a science fiction franchise created by Overbrook Entertainment, which is Will Smith's production company. And did anyone see After Earth with Jaden Smith? Oh, one more hand came up? Okay. So that's what happened to my big break in Hollywood, is that many people went and saw the movie. After Earth is not a franchise today, although there are books. I saw some books in Barnes & Noble of the novelization of the movie. I think they're still on clearance, and they're still trying to get rid of them. But that was really interesting. They ended up shipping a mobile game published by Jump, which at the time was interesting, and it was the only mobile game for a movie tie-in that had a higher rating for the mobile game than the movie did. So the lesson that I took from that is don't cast your son as the lead actor in your big Hollywood science fiction blockbuster. So yeah, that didn't turn out all that great. So after that, we moved on, shipped a game called Epsilon on Steam in early access, which unfortunately was not successful. And then I also put out a game called Hotel Blind. Hotel Blind was a virtual reality simulation of being a blind person in a hotel room. And it was the first Unreal Engine game to ship that ran consistently at 120 frames per second on virtual reality. At 90 hertz, and that's because it was a game about being a blind person, and it was had no graphics, so it held steady at 120 frames per second. That game came about, and it wasn't calling it a game. It was really an experimental, learning and educational experience. It actually started out from a Gamma Sutra article that I wrote called 10 Steps to Being an Indie Dev. And I don't remember exactly what was in the article, but I had seen a buddy, a friend on Facebook had posted about how he wanted to start working on a game, and people were giving him all sorts of advice. They're like, oh, you should write this design Bible, and you should come out with your, who your character is and all this stuff. And I said, well, just go download an engine and start making the game. And people were like, oh, no, you have to have all this planning. And I'm like, okay. So kind of in response to this, I wrote this article. And the article was basically like, get a good PC, get backup, get an engine, start making the game, get more backup, get additional backup for your backup, get more backup. I'm really into backups. If you're not using source control, stop right now. Just leave, go download source control, use source control. Anyway, so I wrote this article, I published on Gamma Sutra, and a bunch of commenters came on and said, well, you can't just, why are you buying a new PC when you don't even know what kind of game you're making? How are you going to make a narrative game if you don't know what your story arc is and all this stuff? And I was like, well, you know what? I'm just going to make one. So that day, that was on like a Saturday, and the next day I had picked up my daughter from soccer practice, and I was driving home, and on the radio there's this story on NPR on this show called This American Life with Ira Glass, where an author, a professor by the name of Ryan Knighton, he's blind, and he travels around the country and lectures on, I actually don't know what he lectures on, but he was talking about how, telling a story about this time that he had gotten lost in his hotel room trying to find a telephone. Because of the way he maps out a hotel room and the way the room was laid out, just this kind of funny anecdote. And I was like, oh, that could be a video game, and I could make that. This was before the Unreal Marketplace was really big, before you could go out and get a lot of assets easily, which I'm going to talk about today when I do my demo. But I just decided to make it. So I spent a total, for the first draft, I spent a total of 11 hours in Unreal Engine 4. I believe it was 4.14 is when I started. And I recorded the whole thing and put it up on YouTube. So that's actually all up on YouTube. There's the first 11 hours of me making the desktop version of Hotel Blind. And then I started, got some press. Some press were interested, probably because of the NPR connection. And eventually people kept making jokes about how it should be in VR, because VR was real new at the time. And I had run into Joe Kreiner, who's one of the heads of BizDev at Epic, and said, hey, I made this game about being blind in Unreal, and it runs at 120 frames per second. Isn't that awesome? And he said, yeah, that should be in VR. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And then a week later, a Vive development kit showed up on my door from Epic. So I figured that meant that they were serious, that I should actually do it. So I did it and ported it to VR. And it's up on Steam right now. You can download it for $1.99. It doesn't have great reviews. Turns out that being blind is very disorienting to people with sight. So actually, I had the game design thing that I learned from that is when I first implemented it on PC, on desktop, I just had WASD as the movement, forward, back, left, and right. And it was relatively easy for people to quickly get their bearings because all the rooms were based on, 90-degree angles. And what the gameplay was basically, you start in a room, the entrance to the hotel room's behind you, the room randomizes every time you start, and you have 5 tasks. You have to call your spouse, work on your laptop, brush your teeth, take a shower, and sleep. And then after you do all those, you have to find the exit, the door that you came in. Well, you can imagine on keyboard, going left, left, right, that's pretty easy. But when you get into VR, the default look controls for VR is where you actually look. So on a gamepad, you stick left and right. On VR, you look around. And when you're blind and all you can do is use hearing, or text prompts to do that, the first thing people would do is they start looking around while they're moving forward. Well, of course, the character's actually doing this, moving around back and forth, and people would get completely disoriented. And the first E3, I got in, I got hosted by Operation Supply Drop, which I'm a board member of, and I was demoing Hotel Blind in VR, and the first reporter that sat down to play it, it took her over an hour to beat the first room. And she was completely discombobulated. She was getting dizzy. She was having a lot of trouble, but she stuck with it and she got it done. And after that, I learned that I needed to disable look as the directional movement in the game. So once after that, I didn't necessarily want people spending an hour completely discombobulated because 99% of the people would quit. So I changed it to where when you use the stick movement on the controller, that you would just move in the cardinal directions, and that way people could stay oriented. So good design lessons, even in games that aren't supposed to be like that. So before I get into my demo today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Unreal ecosystem. And basically, this isn't a sales pitch. I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of the different resources that are available to you right now and to indie developers to ship games and get support for games. Epic is a big, well, we're not a big company. We're not a big company size-wise, but we do have a lot going on. So I'm going to touch on the Unreal Engine. I'll talk about some of the elements that come with that. I'm going to talk about the Epic Game Store, which some of you are interested in, Epic Online Services, and Epic Mega Grants. Does anyone like money? Anyone? Anyone not like money? Okay, that person, right there, if you don't like money, you can step out during the Mega Grants part. You won't be interested in that. But for everybody else that's interested, I talk about some money stuff. So getting into that, Epic Games and the Unreal Engine. If you're not familiar with Epic Games or the Unreal Engine, Epic Games has been around since the 90s. It was founded by Tim Sweeney, I believe out of his garage or his grandma's basement or something like that, standard billionaire founding story. But the Unreal Engine was first shipped with the game Unreal, believe it or not, that came out in 1998. And it was originally developed to be a licensed engine for AAA development. And when I say AAA, I mean big commercial releases. One example that's actually, I just saw a commercial on TV that's coming out soon is Gears of War. Gears of War was a game originally created by Epic. It is now fully owned by Microsoft. They actually purchased the entire IP. And it's being released, I don't know if it's out yet, but it's coming out this fall by Microsoft, and it's still using the Unreal Engine. So we license the big game technology to a bunch of big game studios, Sea of Thieves, PUBG, Gears of War. Lots of games use the Unreal Engine, but also indies like Kine just came out. That's using the Unreal Engine. But in addition to making the engine, we also make our own games. And like Corey mentioned, we do have one that's relatively popular. Fortnite came out, or Fortnite Battle Royale actually came out on the Xbox the week that I joined Epic. And as you might imagine, that kind of had an impact on the company. We've gotten quite a bit bigger from that since then, both on the engine side and on the game side. And the great thing about that for me was that I got hired. And they said, "Okay, we're gonna have you as an Unreal Evangelist. It's not really defined, but we'll figure it out as we go along. You'll be able to check in with your bosses and have a lot of oversight to really have an eye on what you're doing." And then a week later, they're like, "Yeah, we ship Fortnite. Go away. Do whatever you want. We don't care." And so for the first year, I was kind of just like, yes, go do Unreal Engine stuff. We have to focus on this Fortnite stuff. We have to get this on every platform across the planet and license everything and get crossplay going so we can open that up to the world and have a AAA games on Android and mobile and have crossplay and do all these fun things. And so the first year at Epic, I really got to kind of run my own show and kind of define what an Unreal Evangelist does. But the engine, is anybody not familiar with what a game engine is? Cool, good. Is anybody not familiar with what Unreal Engine is? Okay, we got one in the back. So Unreal Engine is a suite of tools used to develop and ship video games. So the way to think about a game engine is, has anybody used Adobe Photoshop or any of Adobe's tools? Cool. So when you open up Adobe's launcher, they have the Creative Suite launcher. It's a little red icon, and you open it up, and it's like 10 programs. It's like Photoshop and Illustrator, and then a bunch of others that they're continually trying to sell you every time you open up, the one that you actually bought. You can imagine a game engine as all those programs slammed together into one tool for shipping game development. Unreal Engine is the one that we've developed. There's others. There's Unity. There's Game Maker. There's some open source engines out there available. And it's a suite of tools. Game engines started out primarily as graphics rendering engines and then moved to physics rendering engines. But these days they are fully connected, especially Unreal Engine, fully developed suites of tools with built in, your support for networking, all the various different things that you need to make a game, from something as basic as Hotel Blind all the way up to something as prolific as Fortnite. One of the strengths that we have as a developer is that we're making a game engine, but we also ship our own games. And so the tools that we use to build things like Fortnite and the improvements and the optimizations that we do to be able to support a game running on Xbox, PlayStation, Switch, PC, Android, iPhone, and having all those different platforms be able to run simultaneously together, all that work and optimization rolls back into the engine as well. So when we do an optimization for the iPhone to help Fortnite, we roll that back into the iPhone cooker for Unreal Engine. And that gives a lot of strength and a lot of benefit to the engine, because we are actually in developing. So when I'm doing something and I find a bug and I report it in, it gets fixed and rolled out to all of our licensees. So I already mentioned some of the games that are using Unreal Engine. Big AAA console games like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. It's being produced by EA. That's coming out on major consoles. I don't know when. I don't want to announce that if I do know it. But other games that you might not expect Unreal Engine to be in, Minecraft Dungeons. And this screenshot's actually Minecraft Dungeons by Xbox on the Switch in Unreal Engine. Which is very exciting to see, the companies coming together. On the upper right, we have Lineage 2M by NCSoft. It's one of the biggest mobile games on the planet. Mobile obviously is huge in South Korea, and Lineage is one of the biggest Korean franchises in the world. And then we also have indie titles and VR titles like Moss, shown in the lower right. That's developed by Polyarc, which is a studio in Seattle. It's a lot of the folks are ex-Bungie folks that I work with. Actually, on my Twitter feed or my LinkedIn feed, there's a panel interview that I did with 3 different indie developers, including Polyarc, that have actually shipped well-received titles like Astroneer, Moss, and Creature in the Well that I did at Indie Dev Days a few weeks ago. That's up on my social media right now if you want to take a look at that. So how does licensing work in Unreal Engine? First off, to get the Unreal Engine, if you have Fortnite installed on your PC, you already have the ability to get Unreal Engine. You just click from Fortnite over to the Unreal Engine tab on the top, and you can download the engine. Anybody can download the engine for free. Our business model is that you download, you develop it for free. You get full source access, so you have access to the full source code of the engine. You can crack it open, destroy it to your heart's content. I recommend not doing that for indie games, but if you want to, you can. So you can learn from that as well. There's no paywall or anything where you have to get a special license to get source control access. That's available through GitHub. And the way we make our money is on royalty. So for a EULA licensee is anybody who downloads the engine and agrees to the EULA. If you've done that, you are now a EULA licensee. Our monetization is based on a 5% gross royalty. So what the gross means, and 5% gross means that if you ship a game on Steam and you sell it for $10, then 5% of that $10 is the royalty that you owe to Epic. So regardless of what cut the store takes, whether they take 30% or 12% or 50% or whatever, your royalty is based on the gross amount that you sell the game. Same with pre-orders on crowdsourcing and things like that. Now, we do waive the first $3,000 US per quarter. So $12,000 a year, we waive that for royalties. So until you make $3,000 per quarter, you don't have to make any kind of reporting of royalties or anything like that. And part of that is because we don't want to have indies worrying about like, oh, I just shipped my game and now I got to start worrying about calculating royalties and doing that. You don't need to worry about that until you make some money. And honestly, I think part of the reasons it would probably cost more to have an accountant process, those $100 royalty payments than it would just to waive them. We do have custom and enterprise licensing available. So if you're doing, if anybody's here working in enterprise and architecture or medical, where you're doing more B2B business, you can always hit us up and talk about enterprise, more traditional seat licensing if you're not doing a traditional like a game. So that was my sales pitch, by the way. I said I'm not a salesman. That's the sales stuff. I'm done with that now. Source code, I talked about that already. You can get it through GitHub. We actually take submissions from the community. So if you fix bugs in the engine and you want to submit them back into the stream, you can do that. Source code is great. We also have the Unreal Marketplace, and I'm going to talk a little more on detail when I do my demo here in a few minutes. But definitely check out the Marketplace. Marketplace is for content creators to create content for other developers to use. So when you purchase the content from Marketplace to use in your projects, you have full license to do that. You can ship them in your game. We also have content that Epic puts up for free. That number has just raised, it was $17 million of assets, but we just had another release last week of a bunch of Infinity Blade assets that bring it to $21 million worth of assets. $21 million is what we spent to create the assets. You can download those for free and use them in your Unreal Engine project. The assets that are available for free from Epic are licensed for use in any Unreal Engine project. So you can use them in a game, you can use them in a TV show, a webcomic, whatever you want to use them in. Anything that you purchase is licensed for use in any product. So if you are a Unity developer and you see an asset on the Unreal Marketplace, you can go purchase that, download it, export it, bring it into Unity and do whatever you want. Now, the assets are only supported, i.e. tech support, for use in the Unreal Engine. But if you want to rip them apart, if you've purchased them, you do with what you please. The only thing you can't do with Marketplace assets is download them, put them into your own package, and re-upload them for sale to the same Marketplace. We don't allow people to do that because that would not be very fair to the sellers that actually made the content. It's also a really good learning resource. If you're into blueprints, if you're a blueprint scripter like me, and you want to learn how to build an RPG inventory system, you can go out and spend $50, $75, buy someone else's RPG inventory system, rip it apart, and take a look at how you want to use it. We have support, community-driven, Answer Hub, forums, online learning. Go to unrealengine.com, you can find that, or go to the Learn tab on the engine launcher. And we have a strong community. So we have Facebook group, UE4 devs, UE4 help desk. We have a UE4 promo group. We have a UE4 jobs board on Facebook. We have a Discord that's actually community driven, run by Unreal PDX out of Portland, one of our meetup groups. We also have meetup groups around the country. I probably should have that on our slide. Obviously, the one here in West Virginia, I've come out a few times and spoken to and met with. I recognize some faces out there from that group. So if you're local, you should look up the meetup group here. If you're not local, you should look in your area on meetup.com. I'm not sure if we're going to be using Meetup forever, but that's what we currently use as our site for organizing those. So I'm right in half an hour. So the Unreal ecosystem, I'm going to run through this relatively quickly. We've got the store. If you're not familiar with the Epic Games Store, then you're not familiar with games in the internet. We launched the store last year. It's been successful. We've been focusing on curated, high-quality content rather than breadth of content. So if you're interested in launching on the store, you can go to the About page on the store, and there's a little submission form. But one of the key things with the store that we actually first launched in our marketplace is one of our focuses is changing the paradigm for developer cuts. So on the Epic Games Store, all developers receive 88% of every game that they sell. That is as far as I know, the highest royalty rate of any store available. And in addition, any Unreal Engine game that's sold on the store, we waive the 5% royalty. So if a developer sells on the Epic Games Store, they're only paying 12% of that royalty as opposed to 35% that they'd be paying on something like Steam. So, we feel that's important. Obviously, part of this, the reason we're able to do this is because of the success of Fortnite. We're able to roll that success out to the rest of the community. And a lot of that's because of the back end that we had to build for Fortnite to do a lot of the monetization. A lot of that infrastructure that we had to build up and those people that we had to hire, we were able to roll right over into the store. That's the store submission. Online services, OSS is, if you've ever launched a multiplayer game, you're familiar with what OSS is. We're launching our own online services program that's going to be available for any engine. It's going to be free to all developers. Again, this is taking the infrastructure that was built by Fortnite and just making it available to everybody else in the games industry. As I understand it, the way it was told to me is basically a fraction of a week's worth of monetization from Fortnite pays for the infrastructure for this, for the rest of the games industry combined. So if you're launching a multiplayer game, take a look at that. It's an ongoing launch. So we have game analytics, ticketing systems, and we're going to be launching more as well. So Mega Grants. Mega Grants is a fund that we put together to encourage people to use Unreal Engine. The first Dev Grants program was a $5 million program that we launched a few years ago. And as of the end of last year, beginning of this year, we had finished giving out that $5 million. And they are grants that we give out to folks. And so at GDC this year, we decided to launch the Epic Mega Grants. And the key difference between Epic Mega Grants and the old Dev Grants program is that the Dev Grant program was a $5 million program. The Mega Grants program is a $100 million program. Now, that doesn't mean we're giving out $100 million right now, but it is a much broader program. We've opened it up beyond games into things like education, open source projects like Blender. We just gave a grant for $1.2 million to Blender, medical, media, TV, movies, enterprise, architecture, product visualization, pretty much anything that you can imagine is available for a Mega Grant. So you can find out more at unrealengine.megagrants. One of the key things to remember about Mega Grants is they aren't intended to fund a full project. Most grants that go out to smaller teams range between the $5,000 and $25,000 amounts, but they are grants. It's not a loan, it's not a publishing deal. You retain full IP rights, you retain control of your project, and we just want you to go out there and make awesome stuff. And then, again, that's part of giving back to the community. So the other thing that we launched recently is called Unreal Indies. This is more of an initiative just to provide a central point for indies coming into the Unreal Engine. We know the Unreal Engine can be intimidating to some folks. As part of this, we've launched this and other programs. We've launched a new online learning portal called Unreal Engine Online Learning, because we're super inventive with our names. But we have a lot of tutorials and programs that you can learn about. If you go to unrealengine.com/indies, there's news stories and information related to being an indie on there. So now I'm going to get to the part that I'm really excited about, which is the Parachess demo. So it's 10:06. I'm going to spend probably about 15-20 minutes on this, and then we'll get into Q&A. So here's the story. I've got this game that I've been developing. I'm a big name game designer. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've been working on this concept and this idea for quite a while of a new idea for a turn-based strategy game. So this is a 2-player combat game, and it's played on, and it's turn-based. It's played on an 8x8 grid, so you have 64 squares. And if you look here, we have different types of pieces that are available to each side. Now, each side has, they're mirrored, so you have the same types of units. Maybe later I'll put in upgrades or some kind of auto-play system where you can upgrade your units between games. But for right now, each team is mirrored. And you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of units. The first type of units are kind of your smaller units. They're the ones out front represented in white and black. They all kind of move the same, have a really simplistic style. But the key pieces in the back are the ones, each one of those has an individual unique movement set. So on the lower left, the orange piece there, they can move in straight lines along your 8x8 grid. Your light green piece, it can actually jump other pieces and move kind of in an L shape. Your pink piece can move diagonally. Your gray piece there is actually the most powerful piece on the board. It's the queen. It can move in any direction it wants at any point. And then the most crucial to the game, as far as winning the game, is the light blue piece. And that we're going to call that the king. And if you capture the opponent's king or force it to not be able to move, then that's how you win the game. So I've been working on this turn-based strategy game for a while, and I know it's going to be big. I know that in 1,000 years, people are still going to be playing this game. And there's going to be like big tournaments between like Russia and China and America. It's going to be like the biggest esports thing, like screw Fortnite, chess. I'm going to call it chess, and this is where it's at. This is going to be the new game. And so now I've made chess. I've worked out all my gameplay issues. Nobody's heard of chess, right? This is a new idea? Okay, good. All right, cool. Trademark is pending. So don't try to step on my copyright. But anyway, so I've developed this game chess, and now I need to go out and I want some more funding for the game. I don't know what to do. I've got it to this point. This is obviously built in Unreal Engine. You can tell by the awesome lighting work I've done. Actually, this is just the default lighting in the start level. But I've got all my gameplay rules built, but now I need to come up with a way to try to sell it. So I'm going to go and pitch this to a big publisher, and I'm going to walk into the room, and there's going to be 10 executives, and they're there, and they're on their BlackBerries, and they're like, sweet, tell us why this is like super awesome. And I'm like, oh, look, I've got these pieces, and they can move different ways, and different pieces, all these different strategies and things that I can do, and people are going to come up with new AI and all this stuff, and they're like, yeah, that looks really boring. And I'm like, no, you don't understand how cool it's going to be. And they're like, yeah, it looks really boring, bye. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, now I'm going to do my crowdfunding campaign. So that didn't work, so I'm going to build up my crowdfunding, and I'm going to put my 30-second trailer about this game. And I'm going to have my 30-second trailer with these pieces moving around the board. And if you've ever looked at Kickstarters, you can probably imagine that's not going to go too well either. So what I need to do is I need to spruce this up. And there's two reasons I need to do this. One, I need to increase the presentation ability of the game. I want it to look better and be able to demonstrate how it can take and apply different concepts to this game, different character sets, different environments, things like that. Make the game look AAA quality. And two, I want to start doing functional testing on the game. I want this to be playable on multiple platforms. I want it to be multiplayer, again, turn-based, so it could be hot seat on PC, it could be turn-based on Switch or Xbox. And so I want to do some cool camera moves and things like that. And I know I'm going to be changing out these. This isn't what I'm going to ship with. This is just my prototype. I know I'm going to be changing that out at some point. So I need some assets to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out to the marketplace, and I'm going to get some assets. And I'm going to start building Parachess. And so what I have here is my Parachess prototype. And I'm going to change the resolution. And sorry, I'm a little limited here on my mouse movements. But give you an idea of what I've done, hold on, there we go, is I've gone through and downloaded assets off the Unreal Marketplace. So all the assets that you see in this shot are available for free on the Marketplace. So all of these characters are Paragon assets. Paragon was a MOBA game that Epic had out before Fortnite. And unfortunately, after Fortnite came out, we decided that we needed to shut Paragon down. It wasn't financially viable enough to maintain. But because we are a development company and an engine company, we were able to figure out the licenses to take those characters and release them for free to Unreal Engine developers. So you can go out right now and download these assets. They're ready to go. Sorry, I'm a little jerky. I got cords. I'm going to move that cord up there. You can go download these assets right now and start using them in game. These are raw as they come. I just drop these in. I am a game designer and a scripter. You'll see what I do here in a little bit in Blueprints. I don't do art. I don't do lighting. I've just used default assets. And I built this entire game in about the equivalent of about 2 weeks worth of work. I've done a lot of maintenance on it, and it's not fully complete yet. One lesson that I learned is that if you're going to choose a game to do prototypes in and learn how to use the engine, don't choose chess. It's way more complicated than I thought when I started. If I had done checkers, I would have already shipped this, but chess rules are way more complicated than I realized before I got into them. So that's a little scoping lesson that I learned. But you can go get these assets. The Skybox is one of our free content packs. That's a customizable Skybox element called Good Sky with the storms and everything. All of the trees and stuff are out of our kite demo, even down to like this beautiful grass and stuff. This is a little Paragon asset. That's my nod to Paragon players. Did anybody play Paragon? A couple people. So that's to my Paragon people out there. And maybe at some point I'll try to rebuild Paragon. That's what they always ask me. I'll get to that at some point. But this is the game. So it's chess, and it is fully playable. So this is the playable mode. So I can move characters around. It's got all the rules for the different characters. So it'll do team swaps and things like that. And as I select and move the different pieces, we've got the highlights. So you can see that the bishop has got the diagonal movement. The knight has the jumping. Queen has her movement. King's restricted. Pawns have theirs. I'm going to run a little cheat code here and move some characters around to show us killing some characters here. Oh, she got a kill during that cheat code. Okay, she's going to run her little kill animation. Wait till she's done. You can see as we highlight characters, we're seeing, oh, and I just accidentally killed the king. Oops. Anyway, you see we have the win animations and things like that. And again, you get some good lessons that you can learn through development. So here is another set of characters. This is a second set. I actually have 3 sets of characters. And there's a couple things that I learned as a game designer just putting this together. The first off was that being a game designer and not an artist, I had these suite of characters out of Paragon, and I had never played Paragon. I don't know anything about these characters. I don't know who a good guy is or a bad guy, or what their backstories are. I just picked characters based on their silhouettes. That's how I laid out the characters. So as you can see, I've got mostly big buff rooks or kind of robot-y looking rooks, smaller knights and bishops, regal, I thought kind of regally looking kings and queens. And kind of just broke up the characters that way. And the first set of characters I had were just kind of mixed up like that. And I sat it down with my kids and I was showing it to them. And my son, the first thing he said was, "Dad, how come there's good people on the bad people team?" And I said, "What do you mean? There's not a good team or a bad team. This is chess. It doesn't matter." And he said, and I think it was this character right here was the good guy king originally. I was like, "Yeah, that's the king." And my son was like, "Yeah, that's not a good guy, Dad. That's a bad guy. He needs to be on the bad guy team." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So I sat down and kind of, again, not knowing anything about the characters, moved them around to teams that looked more good and bad. So that was kind of the first thing as I learned, is that kind of people naturally want to group characters into good and evil. And so once I did that, the next thing that I learned from a gameplay aspect was, get back into gameplay mode here. When I do a capture, like if I take this, I believe this is a queen, I'm going to capture this knight. And if you notice, right behind this knight is another pawn right here. So when I capture them, the queen comes in, he takes the kill, she dies, he does a little dance, and boom. Now, what you didn't notice there is you didn't notice that this pawn was standing right behind him. You didn't see another character in that shot. And that's important because, I'll do another capture here. I'll capture this pawn with this, and again, you notice there's a character right behind that pawn. You don't see the character. He does his smash, Hulk smash move, and boom. So what I do is, what I noticed as soon as I implemented that, you would get this view, the character is going to do its little dance, and all you would see is the back of the other character adjacent to it. So what I do is when I play those, when I do that camera shift, I actually hide the skeletal mesh of the appropriate character in the adjacent cube so that you don't get that character blocking your square. That's a good example of something that you're going to find through prototyping that eventually you're going to have to fix. But the earlier that you can prototype with real assets, with animations and characters of different scale and different sizes, that you're going to find out those things through prototyping. And you're not going to know that until you actually get it in prototyping. The last thing that really, really makes a big difference is performance. if you notice, even on here running out of HDMI, I'm running at a good solid, pretty solid 60 frames a second. I get some drop in as I move characters around and effects are playing and things like that. But I'm holding pretty steady. And the great thing about that is that helps me know that as I come in and if I plan to replace these characters with my own characters, if I stick to these character budgets, from materials, you know, vertices, bones, all those kinds of things, I should be able to maintain this level of performance. The next task that I have with this game is I'm actually going to port it to the Switch. And so once I get it on there and start seeing, you know, how the frame rate looks on the Switch and, you know, optimization on there, then I can take that knowledge and optimize it for there. But a good example is this: if you were working on a third-person action game, say an Assassin's Creed style game, big open world third-person game, and you have your character being a stand-in of like the Unreal Mannequin, the default white character that's relatively low poly, you might, you know, work on all your game prototyping and, you know, have everything built to where it's going to be, and then all of a sudden your character team comes on, drops in your new third-person character that's 10 times the amount of polygons and materials that you were using as prototyping. Now all of a sudden your frame rate is tanked, your performance is tanked, and now you have to figure out whether you're going to optimize the world, where you're going to make all your changes. You need to lower the quality of your post-processing, all those things. But if you use shipping-ready assets like these from the beginning, then you can go in and swap out, use those as your budgets. Your team can look at those assets, determine your budgets, and use that moving forward. And real quick before we get into the Q&A, I just want to give you a little sight into how this was built. So this was built all in Blueprints. Blueprints is our Unreal Engine scripting language. So if you don't know C++ or C#, or you're a game designer like me and you've never touched code, you can get in, you can build all these assets and all these prototypes in Blueprint. So the game is built out of primarily two blueprints. The first is the board. And if I go into the viewport here, here's what the board looks like. It is essentially 64 different tiles. And the board really controls the chess logic. Primarily what the board does is, one, it builds itself. So I can drop it into any environment. I've got multiple environments that you can drop it into. And then it runs the chess rules. So here we have the chess rules. This is, see here on the left, we've got queen, rook, bishop, king. We've got the logic to do north, south, east, west, diagonal. This is when I click on those characters and it does the highlighting to show you where you can move. This is all the logic for that. Here's your pawns over here. They're actually a little bit more complicated because they have differential moves based on, you know, when they've moved and where they are. And then it was funny, I saved the knight for last because I thought the knight would be the most complicated. But she actually ended up being the easiest because she doesn't care where other characters are. She jumps to a certain point. There's always 8 points, and all she cares about is whether there's characters there or not that she can move to. So that's essentially the board. And then on the tile is where the magic happens. So if you notice, when I was capturing those characters and I was moving them around, one of the key aspects that allowed me to build this relatively quickly and easily and keep it performant is that nothing actually moves in this game. Parachess, nothing moves ever. All you're doing is changing the states on all the individual tiles and updating the information to the state of the board of the actual chess part. So when I go on the viewport of the tile and I zoom in, there's basically 3 key aspects of the tile. You've got the base, which is the chessboard, what I call the tile. And essentially what that does is just change material settings to highlight it. You've got the skeletal mesh of the character. You've got the 2 cameras that are built in for those camera motions that I talked about before. And then you've got a set of effects that are actually placed on here that are hidden that you only see when I actually move the characters. So essentially in chess you have kind of 3 things that you can do when you move. Or 3 things that you have to do. First, you have to move away. And so when a character moves out of a space, it essentially comes in the logic and it says, hey, the board tells the tile, hey, you've been clicked on, time to move away. So it plays a little move animation, and then it activates that big blue effect that covers everything up. While that effect is playing, the character's hidden. And that's the move away, really simple. When the next one is moving into an empty space, if there's nobody there, What it does is it plays the effect. That blue beam comes down, covers everything up. It then destroys the existing skeletal mesh, creates a new skeletal mesh, and sets it to the appropriate one for that character, whatever the piece may be. And then, and then it sets the idle. It makes it visible after all that switching's done. And then it sets the idle animation that's going to play, and then it's done. Now, when there's an attack piece, the nice thing about chess is that you can only have one attack state, i.e. your team is moving into a piece occupied by another team. You can come in and basically, now what it does is it says, okay, now you're actually doing an attack. First we're going to do that camera switch, which is the camera that moves behind the character. Then it's going to do a check to see, remember I talked about that if there was a character adjacent to it, whether it needs to hide that character. If it does, then it goes ahead and hides that skeletal animation. It gets the time that the other character is playing an animation, hides it for that amount of time. And then once that's done, then it plays the death sequence. And the death sequence is that red animation, or that red effect starts playing, the existing skeletal mesh starts playing the death animation, and then it explodes, hides all that, and then basically loops over and duplicates the effects from bringing a new character in. Then we have a bunch of logic to clean all that up, bring in the new character, close it out, boom, reset, goes back to the board, goes to the next thing. And that's basically it. So all the logic, this blue stuff up here is set up. This gray stuff is the check king logic that I'm still working on. Remember when I said that chess was more complicated than I expected? So this is all the rules for just moving the main pieces. Now we get down, these are all the rules for checking to see if the king can move. Then I have to have a whole nother set of these to check to see when the king's threatened. Then I have to have a whole nother set of things to see when the king's under check, and then checkmate and all that fun stuff. So if it was just checkers, it would be done, but I chose chess and it's a lot more complicated. So with that, that's the demo of Parachess. Sorry I had to run through I went a little long in the beginning, a little short in the demo part, but I'd love to get to Q&A, and I want to say thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody for sitting through the presentation. I really appreciate it. All right, who's the brave person that's going to do the first question? He's got a mic that he's going to bring around, and that way you're recorded through the system.
Oh, okay. Would it be easy to use the Unreal Engine to make something like a movie or a show rather than a video game?
That's a great question. So the question is, would it be easy to use the Unreal Engine to make a movie or a TV show rather than a video game? I won't say it's easy. Because I don't want to downplay the amount of work that it takes to make live action, but there are quite a few live action shows. There's some on Nickelodeon right now that were made using Unreal. Jon Favreau is using Unreal Engine for his real-time video production in The Mandalorian. There was a movie called Maurin, which is a movie. It's with Steve Carell where he's got the dolls, the G.I. Joes and the Barbies. That's all in Unreal Engine. So Unreal Engine's being used in real-time video production currently, and we are continuing to support that. So yes, we have a new video timeline program called Sequencer that actually just released, I believe, late last year or early this year in Unreal Engine that's specifically for making cinematics or movies. Does that answer your question? Okay. Oh, we're going back there. Sorry, I'm following the mic.
Will there be an Unreal Engine 5?
Will there be an Unreal Engine 5? That's a great question. Right now, this is Unreal Engine 4. We haven't made any announcements about any kind of new engine. We are currently following the path of incremental expansion. If you've been following the engine, we do a lot of work to not deprecate older features, and we've got a lot of big, even though things do get deprecated, but we try to, roll those out so people can adapt as the engine moves forward. But right now, we don't have any plans to announce any kind of break where someone would need to move to any kind of, new software suite in the next, year or anything like that. I know that didn't fully answer your question, but that's about all I can say on it. Not right now, no. Not in the foreseeable future for a shipping product. Are we going to make a line? Yeah, if you want a question, go ahead and just line up there, and that way we don't have to, everybody doesn't have to wait while we're getting the mic around.
If a person were to rather want to code original assets and not use the blueprint, what languages does Unreal natively support?
That's a great question. So the question is about what languages Unreal supports. We support C++. That is the code language that Unreal Engine is built in. So if you are familiar with that, great. If you want to get in and mess with the source code. Most indie projects these days are shipping purely in blueprints. You can ship completely in blueprints. There is some optimization that you would need to do. Blueprints run as a layer above C++, although you can nativize those down into C++ as well.
I also have one more question.
Okay.
In terms of accessibility and getting started on the earliest stages of development, how would you say Unreal compares to contemporaries like Unity and the Godot engine?
That's a great question. So the question is about accessibility is in terms of getting started and learning and things like that. To be blunt, Unreal Engine can be formidable. And it intimidates a lot of people. It's a very powerful piece of technology. Obviously, it's used by some of the biggest, like I said, Mandalorian in movies, big AAA games. But we have made a push for learning and accessibility as far as getting into the engine with the online resources. We actually have, I believe, 30 plus tutorials that we've created online. We found that a lot of people were leaning on video tutorials from YouTube, which is awesome, except when you go pull up a video tutorial from 3 years ago on YouTube and try to start using it, and it's completely outdated. So that's one of the reasons we decided to launch our own. We actually have specific tutorials for people that have used other technology. Specifically, like there's a Unity to Unreal tutorial video on the online resource that kind of gives you an idea between the different terminology between the engines. So we've recognized that Unreal can be intimidating to people who are launching more of those tutorials. For me, it's a challenge because as a game designer, I use all proprietary engines. So at Red Storm on Ghost Recon, we had our own engine. Halo had its own engine. Warner Brothers or Monolith had Lithtech. So I'm used to, like, Unreal Engine to me is super easy and well documented and awesome because it is, right? When you're working in Halo engine, Halo script, you can't go Google how to solve something. You either have to figure it out or find the engineer that wrote it and ask them. A lot of people find, obviously something like GameMaker or Twine that's more focused on a very specific type of game, RPG Maker, things like that are going to be really easy for very new folks to pick up and build a more structured type of game. But the Unreal Engine, once you get your head wrapped around object-oriented programming and object-oriented design and what that means, I find it relatively easy to use. But we know that it is a challenge. Like I said, I purposely use that example of opening every Adobe program at once. And like me, I'm pretty proficient in Photoshop, but when I open up, one of the other ones, I really don't know what I'm doing. And so it's a similar kind of challenge.
Thank you.
No problem. I know you.
Heyo, nice to see you. Nice to see you again. You talked a bit about the mega grants, but that's for very large scale companies. Can you talk a little bit more about the regular dev grants, the smaller dev grants program, or is that deprecated now? So I think I missed a line there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was about mega grants, i.e. big grants versus the old grants program, which was just grants. So the new program, mega grants is the whole thing now. Mega grants is meant, the term was meant to, hey, it's bigger, it's broader, it's better now than the old grants program. But like I said, the grants range generally from $5,000 to $25,000. So if you have, a small game that you're interested in, if you have, something that's more altruistic, a lot of the things that I've been really excited about is things like, I've seen some grant applications for people that are working on apps to help therapy for kids on the spectrum to help their brains get in the right set before therapy so they can sit and play an application for like 30 minutes that helps them get calm and focused, and it's very smooth. And then there's also like programs that are more like music based. There's all sorts of different things, but the whole program from small grants all the way up to our theoretical cap is for the grant is $500,000, which I was told was a hard and fast rule. We're never going to go about $500,000. And then Tim announced that we're giving $1.2 million to Blender. So Tim can do that because he's Tim Sweeney, but our cap is $500,000.
So the like floor for that entry point is like, it's not even like double A. It's like it can be like indie LLCs, like startups.
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
cool.
Individual person. You don't even need to be a company. You can be an individual person, have a game. It can be a small team. I mean, ones that just recently got announced. Backbone by Eggnut is a small team. They received a grant. There's been lots of small teams that get grants.
Okay, cool.
I've actually got two.
Okay.
The first one was, would you have any advice to give to people who are who are wanting to become future game developers or designers?
Yeah. So would I have any advice for people that want to become designers? I was very lucky in my career coming in as a game designer. It's relatively rare that people do that. And I got hired as an assistant game designer at Red Storm based on the strength of the mods that I made. I made mission mods and weapon mods for Rainbow Six Rogue Spear, so I was familiar with their technology, and I showed my kind of design hat through those mods. And what I would recommend for aspiring game designers is learning tools like Blueprints. Blueprints is the primary interface in the Unreal Engine that designers interface with objects. So even when you have a full engineering staff that are doing custom code, generally the way that the Unreal Engine process works is that those engineers will create functions in Blueprints for designers to use. So that the designers are doing their data input. In the olden days, we used to do our data input into Excel files, and then the engineers would import those Excel files into the engines. Now we do them directly into Blueprints. So data entry, weapon balancing, things like that are done in Blueprints. So to your question specifically, I get a lot of questions these days from people at the lead designer and creative director level, where they're people at my level, they might have worked in proprietary engines, their whole careers, and now they're taking over a new team at a AAA studio with 300 people in it that are really experienced in Unreal, and they message me on Facebook and they're like, I'm taking over this whole team and I've never used Unreal before. I've got 2 months. What should I do? Like, I need to look like I know what I'm doing when I show up to this new job. And I tell them about Parachess, and I say, pick a game, not chess, but pick Go or checkers or solitaire or what's a game where you jacks, some simple game, and build that in Unreal. And the reason to do that is because you have a defined rule set that you can implement. And you have to overcome the challenges that the game rules put towards you, and you're just implementing that. Because game designers like me, we always want to make things better. We're known for like feature creep. And if you're just like, well, I've got 2 months and I want to make a platformer and I don't know what that is and it's completely undefined, you're going to spend so much time defining that you're not going to actually get it implemented. So if you pick an existing game, say Jax, which is the first time I've ever used this as an example, I've got to roll the Jax and I've got physics on the Jax and I've got the ball and how's the ball going to be constrained, how many times it bounces, and what's my interface for picking up the Jax, and I'm literally just making this up as I'm talking, but that's the kind of thing that you're going to run into, but you have a defined rule set, a defined scope that you can implement, and by the end of that, you're going to have a prototype as a designer, a junior designer, that when you're applying, you can say, I built Jax. I figured out an interface for Jax. And whatever that interface may be, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but you did it and you implemented it and you showed that you've done this entire thing. So that would be the advice I would give. And you're going to learn a lot doing that. I'm just, the problems in Jax are now circling in my mind, and it's going to be the next 2 days, it's going to be Jax. And then I start going to Jax in VR. VR might actually be easier than Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling now, but.
My second question, was, in your experience as a designer, which was harder to develop as a game, first person or third person?
That's a great question. So the question is, what's harder to develop, first person or third person? For me, it was third person. And that was because the team, when we started on Ghost Recon 2, which was the first third person game that our team, and specifically I think Red Storm had worked on, or at least the first one in a while, you know, I didn't quite understand a lot of the things that you run into with third person that you don't run into in first person. Problems like parallax, you know, the character getting in the way of the camera, you know, the player's perception of space, things like that. You know, a lot of things are a lot easier that you can use the character to demonstrate things to the player that you can't in first person. But generally third person, just because the amount of stuff that you need to have in there, that a lot of times is duplicated work. Like you may think that, oh, you know, say a squad-based shooter where you've got 4 squad mates, that you've already done all the work for the animations for the squad mates, but the player animation set usually has to be a lot more comprehensive than an AI. So you're duplicating that work and adding on to it, and it can be a lot more work. These days with engines like Unreal, that like the camera boom in Unreal, like that would have saved my team 6 months worth of work on Ghost Recon 2 and Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter. Like my whole like 100-person team would have just, we would have paid millions of dollars just to have what comes by default in Unreal today. So the tools have gotten a lot better, but in general, I think third person is a little more of a challenge.
All right, thank you.
Good questions, by the way. Yes?
So how would you suggest, like, just from a general perspective, someone who is somewhat experienced but not really out there, like, say, pitching an idea and starting a project?
Yeah, so the question is, how would you start pitching an idea and starting a project? I would start building your prototype. Building your prototype, building your vertical slice, build it, build it, build it. I don't write design documents anymore. I don't do it. Now, sometimes you need it on bigger teams. You know, in my panel just recently, the Astroneer folks were like, yeah, we do specs on everything. Specs are different than design documents in my mind. You know, we used to spend months and months in pre-production writing giant Bibles. We call them design Bibles. Giant design documents that specified every single thing in the game. These days, I'd much rather build a prototype in Unreal than write a document. And, you know, whether you're pitching a game, you know, to a publisher, whether you're, you know, going to self-launch on, you know, Steam, whether you're going to run a Kickstarter or, you know, a crowdfunding, you're going to need a prototype at some point. So you might as well start right there. And you're going to start learning what ideas are good, what ideas are bad, what ideas are going to be way more harder than you thought they were going to be. And that starts building your scope and informing everything. So I would get an engine, whether it's Unreal or Unity or whatever, get an engine and start prototyping like day one, personally.
Another question would be, okay, so in terms of like scale and deadlines, how much control does the development team have in dictating how long they would have to work on it? Say a game would take 2 years to develop, but the publisher would want to publish in a year. Like, what aspects do you think would be best to say, like, minimalize scope and kind of, I guess, make the best use of time to get it out in that time?
That's a great question. It's like, who decides the timeline? And it's always going to be a negotiation. You know, the publishing-developer relationship that exists in the game industry isn't well understood outside that, even within the games industry. You know, if you go to any line developer and ask them how it works with the publisher, they're probably not going to know, because the general line developer's never been in an actual pitch meeting. You know, I've been at every level from, you know, literally taking a game pitch, you know, with the Warner Brothers team to, you know, LA and then New Zealand to pitch to Peter Jackson and the Saul Zaentz company and lawyers. And I've done all those things. And really it is a negotiation, right? You've got the publisher who wants a certain budget and a certain deadline, right? And then you've got the developer, well, and everybody wants quality. Nobody's ever going to sit in a meeting and go like, yeah, we don't want quality for this game. Our prime selling point is low quality, right? But, you know, your triumvirate is time, budget, and quality. Yeah, time, budget, and quality. So you have to you don't always necessarily get everything that you want. So, generally, the publisher will set the budget and sometimes the time frame, but a lot of times the budget is going to set the time frame. If you have 100 people and, a $10 million budget, then you can work out the monthly burn rate for those 100 people, divide it into that budget. There's your schedule right there. Because at the end of that budget, you're running out of money and nobody's going to work for free. Well, people might, but then you might go to jail. Anyway, so it really is a negotiation. Sometimes games get pushed out farther that the teams don't want. Sometimes the teams want to wrap something up and move on to the next project. And for whatever reason, launch slates and different projects, a publisher might go, it can't come out until next quarter, next fiscal year. And sometimes that things may get shelved, like they get put in a box until it's time to ship. And sometimes they'll keep working on it. It really depends. And there's not a good, hard answer, but a lot of times the budget drives the timeline.
All right. And one last question. So how would you suggest dealing with like major setbacks, like a giant, say, loss of data happens, and that can really set back the release of a game because they could lose like something really big, like 10 hours off the game because of like them losing a part of data or like losing a backup.
So, dealing with crises is standard. First, go read my article on Gamma Sutra. I mentioned backups like 5 times for that exact reason, because I've heard all these horror stories, and I almost had one. On Takedown, our Perforce hard drive failed. So one morning we came in, we all tried to check out a Perforce, and it was dead. The hard drive just died. And when it failed, the backup hard drive died. Luckily, we had an online backup, and Terry, my QA guy, he had it restored. We were back up and running in like 2 hours. But, you have to plan on, projects tend to last, a year is short for a game development project. They last a long time, and things change. Platforms change. New things come out. Bottoms fall out of entire industries. VR, Steam opening up to anybody who wants to publish on Steam. When I started on Steam in 2014, I was an approved developer. Awesome. I had gotten all that behind me, so I made a huge personal investment into a game, and by the end of 2014, 1 million people were publishing on Steam every day, and discoverability was completely destroyed. And it completely wiped the business model out from under me. And I had to deal with that. And that's the fact of life in the games industry is things change. One key team member has a death in the family. I had a team member, my animator, was riding his bike in Seattle and got hit by a car and was out for 3 months. And he was a FTE, he was a full-time employee. I still paid his salary. I did everything I needed to do. But when you have an 11-person team and one person gets wiped out for 3 months, that's a major hit. And you can't do anything about it, right? They can't work from the hospital. You have to be a good boss and do that stuff. So you try to plan for contingencies. 99% of the big disasters that hit teams, gamers never know about, and people that follow the press never know about it. I did my first interview for a games magazine from a hospital bed because my thyroid quit during Ghost Recon 2, and I collapsed during mocap shoot. Nobody ever knew. But you just deal with it and roll forward. Does that answer your question? One last question. I'm getting all hand signals from everywhere. So the last one.
Hello, I'm back. So obviously being an independent developer has a lot of freedom associated with it, but there's obviously a lot of caveats too. You have a small team. You have people doing, many times more jobs than they would in a multi-million budget, like 1,000 people team you'd find at a AAA team, a AAA studio. So what would you say whenever you made the transition from triple or double A to indie, what did your team do to overcome the issues associated with a smaller team, lower budget? Like what helped you get your bearings, so to speak?
So I can speak to, the question was, obviously with a smaller team and a smaller budget, specifically in the indie space, you don't have the resources or the team size that you would have on a big AAA game. And the question is how I prep for that. And the answer really is poorly. I poorly had an approach. I had my budget was big for an indie game, but it was still probably a 20th or a 40th of what I was used to. And you know, the answer to your question is really in scoping. What I should have done is, if I was doing what I should have done if I just want to go into indie space, is think about, with my budget and my team size and my time, what can we build? What is doable? And then where can I innovate in that space, right? Instead of like, this is what I want to do, and now how do I compromise to get as close to what I want as I can with the budget and time and people that I have. That's the route that I went, and I didn't quite get there, and I don't have a studio anymore. So, you know, the indie space, you know, the draw of indies and the draw of being an indie game developer is that you have all this freedom. You can do whatever you want. You don't have the corporate man coming down and say that you got to make a God of War, and I don't want to make a God of War, because who wants to be like super duper successful and make awesome characters? Like, I want to do my own thing. And that draw is very strong, but there are a lot of challenges to go to that. You know, if you think about it in the retail world, right? And you are going to start your own, you're like, I want to go into the moving business. I want to go into the business of moving trucks. Moving trucks are awesome. I love moving trucks. I want to be in that business. And it sounds funny, but I spent a lot of time in my teenage years working for U-Haul. And I thought I could create my own moving truck company. Well, you kind of have a choice. You can go to work for U-Haul or Ryder or, you know, a few of those, and they've got a whole infrastructure, and you get a paycheck the rest of your life if you're an awesome employee, whatever. Or you can start your own company, and, you know, maybe it'll grow into 2 guys in a truck like they did, or maybe it'll just flame out after 5 years. But, you know, as an indie, the risks that you take, you know, I use the term a lot. It's like the roller coaster is just a lot steeper. So as an indie, the highs are a lot higher, you know, because there's less of you and it's more your product, and you put, you know, what you did is more apparent, but the lows are a lot lower. You know, when the financial impact comes, you know, it's not that, you know, 50 people of your 400-person team got laid off. It's that the company is gone, right? It's that you're sitting in an empty office this big by yourself with no money. So I don't want to make it sound terrible, but I also don't want to sugarcoat it. You know, a good time to experiment with being indie is when you're in school, or when you are a small team of, you know, let's see what we can build in 6 months part-time, working 2-3 hours a day. That can be really fulfilling and really awesome, but it also make you realize how much work. There's a reason that, you know, Halo Reach, I won't say that a Halo game might cost $100 million, right? That money is primarily in people cost. That money is primarily in paying people salary to show up every day and work on the game. But marketing budgets are usually separate from development budgets. They're paid after the game's already made. So, you know, and then the other thing to think about is, in the indie space, don't focus on the purple cows as your examples. I've made this mistake before, and purple cow is a term that I stole from George Miller. George Miller, when he makes movies, he says he only wants to make purple cows. So when people look out across the field and they see all the black and white cows out there, they see Happy Feet or they see Mad Max, and that's a purple cow that stands out, and they want to go see that movie. Well, the problem that people have is they look out across the field and they see that purple cow and they go, oh yeah, Minecraft did it. That was successful. I'll just do what Minecraft did. Cool, sure. Make your game and then sell it to Microsoft for $4 billion, right? Like, I would totally be standing here giving a presentation if I had a project that I could sell for $4 billion to Microsoft. My point is that it's very easy to look at successes, you know, whether it be Minecraft, whether it be Kine, whether it be, you know, some other, sorry, I was going to say a specific name, but I probably shouldn't do that, specific person. But you look at these successful folks in the indie space, and you can usually count them in, you know, 20, 30 projects, right? But how many indie projects are released on Steam every single day? Does anybody know? Is it like 300, I think? 200, 300? How many games are released on Google Play every single day? probably 1,000. So, you know, don't look at the individuals that are super successful. Look at the median and say, you know, what can I do with my career? You know, if you focus on something like, hey, this is building my portfolio, then awesome. You're building a portfolio and you're strengthening that, and that can be really successful. But you know, getting into it as a full-time job as an indie dev is extremely challenging. So just approach it as that. Does that answer your question?
It did.
I don't want to end on a down note though. So go out and make awesome games because you know one of the key reasons I got this job was Hotel Blind. Hotel Blind right now is sitting at I think a 54% on Steam, and all the reviews pretty much say it sucks. And I made like $1,000 off it, but it got me this job, and that was awesome. So do that. Thank you.